uh, there are a lot of people who are paying a lot of attention to making sure that those who may be at risk are not so.
Right. Well, I think we should open up to questions now. I do want to circle back to Guantanamo later, but hopefully somebody will ask about that. But where's the microphone so we can...
The microphone is right here, so
okay.
if you'll just give me a moment to get
let's
it.
Let's here in the first
Clark?
row. Clark. And if you want to state your name and your affiliation, that would be great. So
yeah, I'm Clark Bell with the McCormick Foundation. Since 1992, we've hosted an every other year conference on military media relations. At the last conference, which was about a year ago, there was talk that embedding was actually down. Requests for embedding were down, partly because of newsroom cutbacks, partly because of the dangerous situations in Afghanistan and outside the green zone. I know the dynamics have changed a little bit, but is somebody actually keeping score on how many applications there are for embeds, how many are placed, how long they go? Just wondering if are the records kept on this?
Well, I don't have
the answer is yes, and I'm not the one keeping them. But yes, of course.
There are more embed requests now.
There are. I don't know how they compare with the past years, but there certainly are a large number of embed requests now. Yes, there are. Kandahar in particular.
Does anybody else want to add to that? Do you see more people out there?
The big embed. It varies with the news, of course.
Right.
So in the winter, I know there was a large number of embed requests for Helmand and Marja when the Marja invasion, operation got going, and there was a waiting list, and that's now shifted over to Kandahar as Helmand. It just depends on what the big operation now is in Kandahar.
Okay, we'll cut Nadia here, and then we have 3 Pentagon reporters, so I'll let them have it, and then you. So Nadia, then Brian, and then Tony. I think that's the. Yeah, it's coming right here.
Thank you. My name is Nadia Bilbesi. I'm a reporter with NBC Television, Middle East Broadcasting Center. You definitely raise very important and interesting topics, but I want to ask you about WikiLeaks. For almost, I heard since the documents have been released, it's almost a dismissal from the military and the civilian leadership that we haven't heard anything new, we haven't learned anything new. Yet for us in the Arab media, we've been covering the war in Iraq in particular. It seems like a validation of the reports that's been mentioned about civilian death, about the infiltration of the militias of the Iraqi Prime Minister. Don't you think that the release of the documents is going to cause a problem of credibility to the U.S. military, considering that General Petraeus now is talking about a twofold strategy in terms of reaching hearts and minds, when the U.S. Army and civilian leadership is turning a blind eye, at least, to say the best in terms of civilian death and killing in Iraq?
On the credibility question, I think that we've been quite clear that the release of these documents and the publication of them it causes a credibility question for us, with our allies in particular, in terms of, how do you keep information protected? It's one of the questions I think that is an unintended consequence of the advances in technology. In terms of what is in the documents, I'm not going to get into what is in the documents or have that discussion here. That's a discussion you're more than welcome to have with my colleagues at the podium. But what I will say is that, in my view, the difficult thing for me to grasp about WikiLeaks is that the things that are out there now have been covered by the press and have been covered by journalists, warts and all. And so the question becomes, what is the whistleblower value here? I think it's a very valid question to ask, and there are many of us who question whether there is in this instance.
Well, I would just say from the point of view of the New York Times, I didn't write the stories. Michael Gordon wrote the main stories, and I sit right next to him, and so I can just say what you saw in the paper was that the editors and Michael and the other reporters felt that while it didn't change the overall narrative of the Iraq War as we know, but it certainly added texture, a lot more detail to the historical record, and especially for somebody like Michael, who's now writing his 3rd book about Iraq. and he looked at the documents as someone who they were essential to the historical record on the long history of the war in Iraq. The story on there was more influence from Iran than had been previously disclosed, and again the greater number of civilian deaths and the torture that was going on. So that's the view of the New York Times, that there was something that was important to know in these documents.
General.
There is a little bit of picking at the scab that this WikiLeaks has done. I left Iraq in June of 2004, so my experience is dated. But one thing that I'll not forget is when Abu Ghraib broke, and when my senior Iraqi advisor, who was a brigadier fighter pilot under Saddam, came in and said, General, you can't imagine how badly this is going to play on the Arab street. And we were in the business of developing the Iraqi army and security forces at that time. And we had been put on a pedestal by all the young Iraqi men we were bringing in. And that Abu Ghraib thing cost us dearly. The many snapshots in WikiLeaks that could hurt our reputation will do, again, perhaps not as violently as happened in 2004, but I would also try to balance the bad things that we discovered in there with the great things that young men and women from the United States and the coalition are also doing. So I would plead for a balanced review of these documents as we see outcomes in the analysis that intel officers, either as professional intel officers or as folks who do it for an avocation, try to see into the picture of the last few years in Iraq.
Kirk, do you have anything to add?
I can only speak from my own experience, but the characterization that the U.S. military as a whole turned a blind eye to torture and abuses is incorrect, because I was personally involved with an investigation of abuses of Iraqi detainees by security forces. And I know that my chain of command, my commander, jumped on that immediately, saw it for what it was, as unacceptable, and we investigated it. So for anyone to characterize that this is a blanket kind of policy that has occurred across the spectrum.
I don't think we wrote that.
No, but I'm just, I would just put that out there, that if that's the perception from these WikiLeaks documents, and I've seen in a few media outlets that, the U.S. turned a blind eye to this. In some cases, that may be, in fact, correct. Again, I can't speak to that. I can only tell you from personal experience. Okay, there are people out there trying to do the right thing, as the general said, that have the values and the moral standards to do the right thing when confronted with a crime.
Can I use this opportunity, by the way? I'd be interested, Elisabeth and Brian and Tony and anybody else in the press. WikiLeaks does raise this very interesting issue. Above and beyond WikiLeaks itself, as to the role of the mainstream press in taking the documents, using them, writing about them. We're aware that it's happening. We've had, a number of folks come to us, which we greatly appreciate. Others have not. But I'd be interested in the press view of WikiLeaks. And does that put you in any kind of more difficult situation, or is the framework under which you all currently write and operate allow for WikiLeaks presenting all these kinds of kind of classified documents?
Well, I think I speak for the editors. I think the view was certainly that WikiLeaks was viewed as a source, the way the New York Times would always view a source, which is you check the source out. You just don't take everything verbatim. You get different opinions. In this case, in the most recent, certainly with Afghanistan, but in the most recent case with Iraq, we have Michael Gordon, who's the New York Times authority on Iraq, plus Sabrina, a number of other reporters who covered this war for many years. So Michael and Sabrina poured through the documents, pulled stuff out, had researchers, and would never have didn't use anything that didn't check out. It's like you would go with any source. And then, as you know, went to the Pentagon and said, this is what we've got, and redacting these names and so forth. So, and that was how the New York Times chose to view WikiLeaks, not as a collaborator or partner, but as a traditional outside source.
How do you independently verify some of those field reports?
You have to ask Michael, but I mean, some of it, I guess, the point is, it was reviewed by people who have covered the war for a long, long time.
Right. Brian first, and then
Tony. Brian Bender with the Boston Globe. To kind of follow up on Nadia's question, she talked about credibility and whether, obviously the documents, as you said, were released illegally, but they do raise credibility questions, I think, in the minds of some of us. And you mentioned credibility in terms of American allies, can the U.S. government keep secrets, that sort of thing. But one thing that really struck me, and it's been covered somewhat in the last few days, is some of the numbers on civilian casualties. Something that us in the media for a long time in Iraq tried to get a sense of how many civilian deaths were there, who were responsible for them, because obviously the U.S. was not the primary driver of that. And we were told for many years that, the U.S. military doesn't keep those statistics. And then when some media outlets would make estimates based on news reports, other sources, I think at one point it was the AP was estimating 2,000 civilian deaths per month. Well, we were told by the U.S. military command at the time that was overblown. Well, it turns out that one of the documents, or a number of the documents, talk about that in the WikiLeaks release, which put the number at one point at 4,000 a month around that same time. So my question to you, I guess, is, without getting into the specifics of that, is where you sit sort of atop this pyramid of this, what is clearly a vast public affairs operation worldwide, how can you be sure that when that official is put out there to talk to the press, that number one, they're not lying, or number two, which I assume is the case more often than not, they don't have all the information and they're actually misleading by omission? General Casey was asked about this the other day because he was the commander at the time. He's now the Army Chief of Staff. And he basically just booted the question and punted and didn't answer it. Well, I haven't seen the documents. But, the fact is his command, number one, said for a long time they didn't keep casualty counts at all. And then when they did respond to press inquiries about press estimates, said it was overblown. It turns out the internal estimates were even far higher, double than that.
One of the first estimates came from President Bush. I remember when he first gave a number publicly on civilian casualties, and it was news because that was the first we'd heard of it.
Right. That was much later.
But it was, well.
Anyway, so the question is, how do you know, or how can you be sure that the information that's getting out there is truthful, is not omitting information, and is not purposely untruthful?
It's a great question. I can't speak for those who headed my office in the past, although I'm sure they have approached this in the same way that I would, or I think anybody would, whether Republican or Democrat. When you take a job like I have, you have to take this on the understanding that your credibility is key. It's your currency. You have to say, as I did under oath in front of the Senate, that I will be as credible, transparent, and timely and accurate in dealing with the press as I possibly can. The people that I choose to work with me, the people who speak on behalf of the department for whom I'm responsible, I'm accountable, and I can only do the very best that I can to ensure that what is being said is the truth. I don't know how I or anybody else could answer your question above and beyond that, other than to say that it is a commitment that I have. It is a commitment that those who work with me have to take in order to work with me. And